Yo, Pokey26 here, and we have the third iteration of the PTR patch notes 1.36.2 for Warcraft 3 Reforged. And I have not looked over these yet, so it is basically new to me as well. I have heard a couple things, but I don't actually know the details of those things anyways, so it's pretty new to me. There is a line here that is important to know, and it says they are limiting further changes to only number values, which means what we see is what we get, apart from full reverts if they want to essentially undo the thing altogether. So it's either as is with maybe number tweaks or reverted back. No more changes, supposedly. And this will be what they are releasing in terms of changes. That being said, quite a lot of added and modified changes. Hopefully I remember most of what the old changes were. I think it's generally around here somewhere, but yeah. Anyways, you can always look at the old PTR notes if you want to see the differences. But yeah, we'll go along with this. And so starting off, first added / modified change, Searing Arrow's mana cost reverted, so it's back to normal. I do think that's probably good. I think the main benefit of this was less so mana wise. I mean, it is mana wise, but like the main benefit of this is you would use less moonwells when you have to heal your priestess. Yeah, this is probably a good change to revert that back. It was kind of unneeded. Like a priestess is already fine as is with their arrows. Force of Nature mana cost increased from 85 to 95. I'm pretty sure this isn't Force of Nature in the current patch like 100, right? And then they were going to reduce it to 85. They were putting it from 100 to 85 and now back to 95. So a 5 cost reduction overall is very, very negligible. But I guess if they want to make Keeper a little more viable again, rather than the Demon Hunter that is a lot more common these days, that's one way to do it, because they don't really want to buff Entangle as far as I know. So buffing Force of Nature mana cost is a reasonable way to go about it. And have Elf with different viable first heroes, I think is the point. Tranquility cooldown reduced. Don't think this was particularly needed, but okay. There's another change where it's like a niche scenario where Keeper gets a little bit more viability. And the reason why like this one is super niche, right? Not only do you have to reach level 6 and choose Tranquility and use Tranquility in a situation where it matters, but you have to use Tranquility again 20 seconds sooner where it also matters for this to have had an impact or value or whatever. So it's very niche, maybe more so for team games or free-for-all or whatever, which no one cares as much for the balance in those because they're a mess to begin with. Fan and Knives target changed from 567 to 666. I actually can't even remember anymore what was the default, what they were changing it to. Like, I don't remember what the original numbers were, but Okay, so they're just gonna have it consistent for number of targets. I think that's a good way to do it. To have a consistent number of targets. But what was this before? 75 damage per knife, and it's now less. Now it's 70 damage per knife. And what's this one? So level 2 level 2 knives got buffed, which level 2 knives already performed well, I believe, or like, decent enough. And level 1 knives got nerfed. And max level knives got nerfed. But I don't actually remember again. Oh, I guess they just have the numbers here. Actually, max level knives is potentially buffed, actually. But it's very small. Either way, I don't think Warden is necessarily a big hero. So this will be, again, another niche scenario where it could be helpful for Elf. Could also be worse. Like you probably want to use level 1 knives even less than before. To be fair, most people usually went Shadow Strike on level 1 and then continued using Shadow Strike on level 2 and didn't use Fan until level 3 to begin with. So in that case, maybe the Fan is slightly stronger, but it's still, or like, retrain to Fan as well was an option. It's still very negligible. This number does mean with the Wisp health upgrade change, it will actually still be able to one-shot Wisp in Mirror, but you won't really play Warden in Mirror anyways. That doesn't really matter. Anyways, let's talk about the Wisp health change. So this is something that I think was overdue. Current Wisp health is bad design, disregarding balance. The reason it's bad design is because it is the only functional way for Elf to AoE dispel things is to use wisps. And wisps were way too susceptible to just level 2 AoE spells. Not even max level AoE spells, just level 2 AoE spells can instant shot like 5+ wisps. Sometimes up to the 7+ wisps, which is crazy that you could lose. Let's say you're bringing 7 wisps into a fight to detonate skeletons because you need AoE detonate against skeletons. You could lose like 7 of them instantly if you weren't careful to like 1 carry on, right? And it's a level 2 carry on. Like the Dreadlord literally only needs to be level 3 for that to happen. I think that's horrible design. But balance-wise, Elf maybe doesn't need this. Yet at the same time, if Elf doesn't necessarily need this, it means that they're already performing well enough at top level that this 10 health probably doesn't make a difference, really. It means the Elf at the top level is already juggling well enough, already microing it well enough and stuff that this 10 health, it'll help in certain scenarios, but at the same time, they're already doing what they need to. So this is more impactful at lower levels of play. And at lower levels of play, I think this is fine. I think people should be able to, somewhat slightly more reliably keep their workers alive. I've heard some arguments about other races like human having more trouble keeping their workers alive even though they've had multiple health buffs. But human's a unique scenario. The only reason human has trouble keeping their workers alive is because they force an expo at the start after creeping multiple camps with militia. They put that on themselves. It's their fault that they're in a scenario where they're going to lose workers. So there's not really a right to complain about it, I guess. Like, get over it. Just don't expand then if you don't want to lose your workers. Because that being said, humans don't actually lose very many workers when they are on one base. It's when they go to two base that they lose a ton. They will sometimes lose workers, you know, in the mid to late game if it's like high level heroes. But other races can also lose workers. And in fact, other races might lose a higher percentage of their workers. Like Undead, if you dive them with big AoE spells and kill all 5 acolytes, that's 100% of their workers. You kill 5 peasants, you know, that's less than 50%. Like not even close to 100%. There's a big difference there. I think going off that tangent, I think this is a good change, but balance-wise, maybe it was unneeded, if that makes sense. Because yeah, elf and undead are probably the ones that actually lose the most workers in scenarios where they're like on one base, right? Because ghouls are used in combat and wisps are very vulnerable. Peasants only die because of expansions and creeping with militia. So, whatever. Moving on. I mean, I guess there is even more to talk about this. This does technically set it out of range of certain AoE spells, I think, like rockets and breath of fire and maybe carry on if carry on hits too many targets or something. Or maybe it's already out of range of carry on. I think carry on might be 130, I'm not sure. Maybe it's only 125. So it's possible that maybe this change should be 125 instead of 130 at first, at least. See how it works, if they're going to change that at all. But it is definitely nice to have something like this so that elves aren't required to load up wisps in a clunky zeppelin to do AoE dispels if needed against things like skeletons, which they have been trying previously to buff necros in different ways. So, yeah. Moving on to other things that are probably more important. Nature's Blessing, lumber cost reduced by 50. Hunted. Oh, wait, no. That's what some of that. Okay, Nature's Blessing, lumber cost reduced. As an elf, I really like this. I do think the cost of 200 lumber on Nature's Blessing was too high to be able to afford when you want to afford it. But at the same time, you could barely manage to scrape by and still get it. Or, you know, generally you just build extra wisps early and those wisps accumulate the wood you need by the time you can research Nature's Blessing and so on, and it works out fine. So I don't think this was needed per se, but it is nice that the elf is able to more easily fortify their buildings if they want to. It is a long, you know, a decently long research. It is still costly, and it just gives armor to buildings. You know, it's not like, I mean, I guess it affects the move speed of buildings too, but maybe this is. I don't know how I want to say this, but I think as much as I think it would be nice to have a lower wood cost on this, I don't think it needs to even be 50 if they're going to lower it. Like, you can just make it 175 instead of 150. And that would still be impactful, while not like too easy to attain, because it is a pretty decent upgrade. You know, elf has pretty good utility upgrades with Ultravision, Nature's Blessing, Wellspring, and so on. So they're all valuable, and they should probably cost quite a bit of wood, just like other upgrades like Fortified Burrows and stuff, right? Which is 175. So I wouldn't hate this to also be in like 175. I would say. Haunted Goldmine build time reduced. They want to bring back Undead expansions. I think Undead expansions are poorly designed currently, but you know, what can you do? The problem with Undead expansions is that Undead expansions tend to just win the game in many scenarios. Sometimes 2 base versus 2 base is doable, but if the Undead's ever up a base on you, you're generally pretty dead in like all matchups. But yeah, 2 base versus 2 base still doable. Oftentimes people actually go 3 base versus 2 base if possible against Undead. But yeah. That being said, it's only 5 seconds, so I think this is fine. Especially because I think it used to maybe even be 100 seconds in the past. I don't know. This is fine. I don't want to say it's necessarily good or bad, but it's fine. Curse can no longer target mechanical units, so they reverted this change. I personally think this would be cool to have, but I understand why they reverted it, and it's because they want tanks to still have some niche value, which is particularly their value against Undead, because they already don't have value in human or orc matchups, and they're less valuable against elf, but they can still be used against elf, particularly for sniping moonwells and forcing talons, you know, forcing a wind and talons. But oftentimes elf is okay-ish with that because hippos and fairy dragons are also pretty good if it goes into the human making casters later. But for Undead, this would have helped a lot against tanks, but maybe they still want tanks to have a place in the game. So I don't hate that they're reverting this, but playing as Undead, it definitely would have been nice to have the convenience of cursing mechanical units like tank. But yeah. The other reason I think they probably reverted this is because it would make it too simple for Undead to always throw up a tempo. Because now you can go Banshees both against mechanical builds with tanks or Knight builds with Knight gyros, because you can possess / curse / anti-magic shell against Knight builds as well. And that's also good. And I mean, even Banshees even have value against Griffin builds because of the anti-magic shell, right? So it's like, it's probably just too convenient if Curse is good against everything, or if Banshees are good against everything, basically. So I understand why they reverted it, I guess. Wand of Negation now has 5-second cooldown. I don't actually know what the cooldown was before. I'm going to assume something like 2 or 3. 5-second cooldown. It's probably pretty reasonable. 5 seconds is still pretty quick. It's just not like that. You can't just double instant AoE dispel, which is fine. Now, Wand of Negation requiring Temple of the Damned. I don't know if I like that, because now you're putting Wand of Negation in a place where it's not used again. So I think it's bad. I think either keep Wand of Negation. Actually, maybe this even had a longer cooldown. I don't actually know if this was a buff or nerf. What was the original cooldown of this? Maybe it was actually 10 seconds and they made it 5. In which case, either way, I think 5 is a decent time for Wand of Negation, 5 seconds. But I don't like it requiring Temple of the Damned, because I think Undead should have access to a dispel, kind of similar to how Elf has wisps. If they really needed a spell right away, Undead can now get Wand of Negation for dispel, you know, rather than waiting for tier 3 and destroyer form and destroyers for their dispel. Kind of like Elf needs lores and then dryads and then abolish research, and it's only a single target to dispel on tier 2. So it's like both Elf and Undead have this problem with dispel sometimes if they don't have something else. That's where wisps come in for Elf, and would be nice if Wand of Negation came in for Undead, but Now that it's locked behind temple, it makes the item a lot less appealing. Or I shouldn't say appealing. It's definitely appealing, it's just a lot less likely you'll see it. So I don't particularly like this. Ghoul Frenzy damage reduction reverted back to 35%. So they're keeping the damage the same as it was before, I assume is what this means. I think they were going to reduce it by 5%, but instead they're going to reduce move speed. I honestly think that's the wrong way to go about it. I think the move speed should be the one kept, particularly for builds that want to go frenzy without Unholy Aura. It'd be nice for ghouls to be able to function that way with like Dreadlord and not even needing a Death Knight type of thing, like solo Dreadlord. So I would like these changed personally. That being said, I'm curious what Undead's, like actual Undead players want. If they'd rather have damage or move speed. But I think the move speed allows for a lot more, right? I think you technically have faster harvesting wood because your ghouls are moving back and forth faster. You have better chances to micro because your ghouls can get in and out of the fights quicker. So I think these should be swapped. Like a small damage reduction. Wait, I thought this was attack speed, not damage. Man, these patch notes are confusing. Is there like a better? Yeah, let's look here. Does this say? Doesn't really say. Just reverted. Anyways, I thought this was attack speed and not like raw damage as well. In which case, if it's attack speed, I think it'd be better to lose a tiny bit of attack speed because that would not make much of a difference in many scenarios. Whereas the move speed matters a lot for micro purposes, so I think this would be better to have them swapped if you're going to nerf ghouls, but to have it, in my opinion, less of a nerf. But maybe people want the bigger nerf to it. Research time reduced. Wait, was this increased and then reduced again? Or yeah, so it's still technically increased from 45 to 50. It was going to be 45 to 60. That's probably good. I think it could have just stayed at 45. I don't think research time was a problem for Frenzy. But if they are going to increase it, then a small increase from 45 to 50 is probably acceptable. Frost attack duration on heroes increased. Is that from Nerubians or frost worms or both? I don't particularly like that, but I feel like they did reduce it as well to begin with. And where is that change? It is frost breath like worm. Does it affect Nerubian as well? Because I thought they were kind of all the same baseline thing, like Nerubian, frost breath, and frost nova, but maybe they're separate. Either way, I don't particularly like that being a longer duration because frostworms already tend to keep a hero permanently slowed. If you have a frostworm on a hero and the hero tries to run away, frostworm tends to continually get hits off anyways. I don't particularly see a reason to make it even better. But I guess it's just to promote more frostworm usage. Okay. I don't particularly like that, but okay. Abomination base damage increased by 2. That's probably fine. I don't think this is a problem. Probably a good change. Give Abomination something without being like just a huge tank by giving health or armor. And instead just give them a little bit damage, which damage is not really their thing. So it's not as big of a deal if they receive a little bit more of it. So I think this is fine. And Abominations are a unit that could see or should be promoted to be used more. So I don't hate that. Tauren changes reverted. I do think it makes sense to have a heavy unit on tier 3 like the other races. But I do think there was potentially a place where this Tauren tier 2 change could have worked out, but it also would have crippled Taurens at tier 2, right? They would have just essentially been better grunts, but hard to fit in because you also generally want bestiary and maybe even lodge instead of totem. And then it's hard to fit the totem too. So I don't know. They're gonna go back to just tier 3 instead and give them move speed. So they're technically buffing them and leaving them at tier 3, which essentially means they are not going to be used much. It's a little sad not to see Tauren, but at the same time, it did feel awkward trying to fit Tauren into tier 2 because of how many other changes need to be made. Like you saw that they reduced pulverize and stuff like that, and it increased research time if they wanted to fit it at tier 2, and instead they're like, nope, we're just going to revert it back. It's gone. So maybe it just didn't work out how they were hoping it could work out by trying to fit it in there. Serpent Ward base damage reduced. I think that's max level Serpent Wards. So like level 3 Serpent Wards that you have on level 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever. That's probably good. They do hit really, really hard for a 30 mana skill. That can't be dispelled. That being said, they'll still have huge value on level 2 Serpent Wards anyways, so I think that's fine. Wind Rider Wyvern's XP reduced to a level 3? I don't like that. I feel like this is being made because people call Wyvern flying XP tomes, but that's such a bad way to do things, and I don't think this change was needed. I think Wyvern play is already from the lowest MMR up to like 2200 MMR, which is like top, 3% of players in the game or whatever. I don't even know the exact number, but let's say top 3% of players. Wyvern is already extremely strong and can be used. People just don't play it because they tend to be long, drawn out, boring hit and run games for half an hour. And people probably feel toxic playing it as well. And they don't like facing it either, and so on. So I don't like this change. Maybe it ends up mattering at top level though, for like the instances where they do mix in Wyvern, particularly against Undead. The Farseer Shadowhunter Wyvern style, or like the token 1 or 2 Wyverns against like elf or whatever race that maybe in picking off human casters against human, or forcing a couple gyros or whatever. I guess it could help work a little in using them, but I just think it's bad because it's going to make instances where you're facing mass Wyvern even more painful because you're not getting rewarded for the kills. as much at least. Zeppelin now cost food. I don't like that change at all, and I don't know what brought this on, but it seems really bad. I think the problem with this change is mostly that Zeppelin was 0 food to begin with. If Zeppelin had always been 1 food and then they wanted to raise it to 2 food, something like that seems like an acceptable change. But when you have a history of 20 whatever years of Zeppelin being 0 food and now you want to make it cost food, that is a horrible change in terms of like design design philosophy. Is that the right wording I want to say? Like, you shouldn't be making those sort of changes to your game where you're fundamentally changing something that was known to be no food cost. That being said, it could work out fine. It's not necessarily a big deal. There are plenty of instances where you can just fit that in and it doesn't change anything. But there will definitely be instances where someone is at 50 out of 50 food and they go to buy a Zeppelin and it says, you do not have enough food. And they're like, wait, what? And they're just going to be triggered and be like, why did this change happen? So I honestly hate this design wise, but it's, I don't know. If that's how they want to do it, then so be it, I guess. Sunray Blades cost reduced. What were the original numbers on this? Does it say down here? Where's human? Sunray Blades. Okay, so they were increasing it from 100 to 100 and 175, but now they're going to do it 100 and 150. I honestly think it could stay at 100, but if they want to make it 100 and then 150 wood, so be it. Generally, by that time, human has overcome their wood troubles anyways, right? The only time humans will have a problem with this is probably if their workers ended up getting picked off. And if their workers ended up getting picked off, they might have trouble to begin with everything. Because usually by now, they've got the wood upgrades on the lumber mill. They have enough workers working and, you know, they've kind of managed their wood. So I guess it can be a problem with like night gyro type styles because it does take a lot of wood to add in the workshops and so on. So maybe this is actually quite a big deal. I personally don't think it needs to be this high of a lumber cost. It can be back to the original at 100 instead of 100 and 150, to be honest. And I think that'd be fine. But maybe this is how they want to slightly nerf human while leaving other parts of human the same or better. And they are making other parts of human slightly better with rifles, 10 HP more. I hate this change. This is going to be very oppressive, mostly against elf. You will definitely see more rifle push styles or like tower push. I don't want to say it's oppressive, but it'll be even more problematic if elf is having to take a little bit longer to kill all the rifles against, you know, tier 2 pushes like rifle caster stuff. I can't remember if there's other changes that affect the matchup in that respect though. I mean, you do have cheaper Nature's Blessing and higher wisp health. So maybe you can fit Nature's Blessing easier against these sort of pushes and make APs or something as well. And maybe it's not so bad. I mean, this change, where does this change end up being the biggest problem? Against Orc? Maybe? Or against Elf? I'm not sure. And does human need this against Elf and Orc? I don't know. But I personally don't like rivals getting buffed in health, but maybe it's fine. is what I have to say. I don't like the change, but maybe it's fine enough. It does. The benefit of doing something like this is there's more chances for human to do some sort of like tier 2 play that doesn't involve having it expanded on tier 1. Because now you can do tier 2 pushes slightly better with having the rifle out. But the problem is if human expands and plays rifle caster against elf, for instance, now it's even stronger there too. They wouldn't really do expansion rifles against the other races. So elf has problems both against expansion and not expansion human. Maybe that's what they want though. They want human to be slightly better against elf in that way. And against orc, it affects one base versus one base with rifle style instead of breaker style. It might be okay-ish overall. As an elf, I don't really like it or like facing it, but I think it might be okay-ish. I don't like this change. I don't really like air units getting buffed. They already slightly buffed frostworms, but very, 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 very negligible. They're buffing wyvern with XP reduced for kills against them, and now they're buffing dragonhawk damage. Stylistically, I hate those changes because I think air is kind of poorly designed in this game. So I don't like it, but dragonhawks are not commonly seen. And the only instance where this is truly going to potentially matter is probably against elf. If you see like expansion into mass hawks, into hawk griffin, then it's quite annoying because 2 extra damage against dryads is significant. You have that massive hawk hitting. Because if it causes the human to take, I need 1 less volley to kill the dryad, it makes a big deal on how quickly you can kill and how quickly you can get out of the fight before AoE takes over. So I don't like that as an elf, but it's negligible in the other matchups. Channel time for Flame Strike reduced. Okay. I don't really like Blood Mage buffs, but as far as Blood Mage buffs go, this is probably the one I'm most okay with because Flame Strike channel time is quite punishing sometimes. So, wait 1 second. Okay. It's fine. Control magic mana per summoned hit point reduced. So does that mean it takes less mana now per hit point? So it's easier to steal stuff? I'm pretty sure that means it's easier to steal stuff now with breakers because it requires less mana. But control magic, as far as I know, is still tier 3. So it's generally going to be negligible because human doesn't necessarily go tier 3 and get this research to begin with. If they're going tier 3, they're probably going something like knights instead against undead and so on. So this would be more impactful if control magic was still tier 2, in which case maybe they wouldn't have even done it either. I think this is their way to try to give breakers something while not giving control magic back to tier 2, but in the end it probably doesn't matter. Demolisher move speed increased. I think demolishers do get affected by speed scroll, right? Or do they not? For some reason I think they do, but I honestly can't remember. Maybe they don't, because mechanical? I don't know. If they are affected by speed scroll, I don't think this change was needed. They aren't. I mean, I still don't think the change was needed, but okay. I do think it's kind of cool to make siege have more value. Um, but I don't really like move speed being how siege gets more value. Because siege already oftentimes just drives away as you're trying to attack it. And then as you chase it down, your opponent kills half your army, in my experience. So, it's kind of weird. The glaive one will matter in Elfmere, but they are nerfing the priestess mana cost of Searing Arrow, but they're leaving the other stuff of Searing Arrow as is, right? I don't know. This is all weird. I think Elfmere is going to be Priestess Mirror now, or at least more Priestess Mirror. You'll still see Demon Hunter, of course, but I think a lot more people will try Priestess Mirror again, especially with small changes like this to being more easily able to micro glaives away from things like Huntresses chasing them down. Circlet cost increased. Does this change anything for like where it drops or how much it sells for and stuff too? Like, I think it still drops from the same spots, and it probably sells for more now with this. It's probably an overdue change to happen, but I don't think they're changing anything else to match this, which is kind of weird. Because I don't know where this fits in on the drop table. It's still like this mostly makes it worse for blade masters to buy circlets, right? Or demon hunters, blade and demon. Although I think even Happy was sometimes buying circlet for Death Knight and then passing it to Lich later, anyways. So it's probably good to make it so circlets are less accessible from the shop. But I think Orc currently is functioning off this with Blade Masters, so I don't know if they should be doing this change now without other changes to compensate in some way for Orc. Maybe Orcs already got those changes when they made Mirror Image more valuable. But not really. I don't know. Kind of, I would say mostly just a weird change to have now, but should have been done a long time ago, and then more changes to fix any problems it caused. So weird as is, but should have been there in the past. Personally, I think it'd be better for the game to just leave it as is. I mean, honestly, a lot of things should be left as is for the betterment of the game, but if they are going to make changes, they really should just be making more changes consistently and having them actually released instead of doing 3 sets of PTR notes over a month or month and a half and then finally releasing the patch like multiple months later. Like, they should just do lots of changes like this all the time and see how it functions after a couple months and then make the changes again, implement them right away if they actually want to make the game meaningful in that way. Otherwise, might as well just leave the game more as is. These are creep values. This one's probably good. And medium armor centaurs. I don't remember which maps these are on. They're probably some of the newer maps that I haven't played much of. I don't I don't think this is a problem to have happen. And this change is good as far as creeps go. This is also good. I think this is more for like 2v2 and stuff on like Tidewater Glades. Stuff like that. But yeah. No, I'm not going to talk too much about the creep changes. Okay, so this is the master change log. The finalized changes. And we can just briefly look over them and like kind of essentially state what I think is good and bad for each race. Knights and Sundering Blade not requiring a lumber mill. It's just kind of weird. I don't think it was necessary. Sundering Blade requires an upgrade again. I think that's probably good, but I think they could have just left it at 100. They don't need to change it to this. This is good. This is probably going to be negligible, but instances where you do see it, it could be really annoying. However, it's probably in low level games where that happens anyways, so it's fun factor. Maybe it's fun to do stuff like that and have something new in the game. So I don't hate the change, even though I think it's a weird change that's not necessarily good for the game, but or like good for, I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a good change, but it doesn't particularly affect top level play. I would think it'd be very niche scenarios where this comes into play. This is good. This is whatever. You're not really seeing control magic much anyways. I don't like this, but it might be okay-ish enough. And this is bad, but dragonhawks were weak, so it probably isn't a huge deal. Yet I still think it's bad. But at the same time, like I said, dragonhawks aren't particularly seen, so yeah. I guess the problem with this is like it's the same thing with Gargs being able to attack ground. They're giving these anti-air units that have shackle for hawks and high damage against air for Gargs, and they're giving them a ground attack that really only matters for picking off workers, particularly wisps, and picking off dryads. Like those are their main purposes. So it's both of them are just mostly going to see use against elf if anything, and otherwise it doesn't really matter. So I personally don't like it, and I think air units getting buffed is kind of bad because they're poorly designed currently. Not enough counterplay, I would say. Troll headhunters base damage reduced. Okay, so they are having. Did they have this before? I don't even remember them having this before in the notes. Yeah, I do like this where early damage is reduced, but berserker damage remains the same. I think that's fine. That's probably good, but you still won't really see it. That's probably fine, but you still won't really see it. You probably still won't really see this, but when you do, the serpent wards are still going to hit hard. So yeah, I think it's fine to nerf it a tiny bit because they're still going to have, I don't know why it's spelled so poorly. They're still going to be having a lot of value on level 2 serpents anyways. So I don't think this is a problem to nerf it slightly on the max level serpents. This, like I said, with dragonhawks as well, I don't really like these air buffs. This one as well is really bad. You're definitely going to see more players going wyvern / wind riders against undead and elf, and maybe even human. Because if your opponent's not getting as many levels from the kills they get against wyvern, you are oftentimes going to be able to get quite ahead in levels because orc is much quicker at creeping with wyvern than their opponents are with basically anything almost. And they're generally the race that's also picking off units like workers after they get done with a creep route. Like they creep a few things, they hit some workers, get a bunch of kills, and now any return kills you get on these wyverns are less meaningful, and the orc might have a little bit more XP disparity when they do strats like this, and this could pose problems. I don't like the change, but if that's what people want to see is more air units, then so be it, I guess. Demolishers, you know, we're maybe going back to the good old gruntapults. I personally don't like this or the Glavy thrower being move speed buffed, but I do think siege units need to be changed in some way. Personally, I think siege units would be much better functioning in this game if they did less damage versus units and had more value against buildings in some way. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. I think siege units in this game are poorly utilized compared to certain other games where there's siege units, like Age of Empires or something. I don't know. So maybe this is their way to try to bring units like demolishers. Who wrote this and how are they so bad at typing or proofreading? It's apparent, demolishers, glavies. What game is this, dude? Okay. Syrian Arrow. I don't like this change at all, but it mostly affects Elfmere, which is just going to make Elfmere even less enjoyable. The Starfall change is fine though. Tranquility, I don't think this was needed, but okay. This is like pretty negligible. It's just 5 mana on a hero that already has like 400 mana and moonwells. So whatever. This is probably a good change, but it doesn't matter much except for an Elfmere, and in Elfmere I think it's going to be annoying. Actually, it probably won't even be used in Elfmere much because most of the time glaive pushes are tier 1, but yeah, maybe. I have seen some tier 2 stuff with it. Moonwell regen, I think this was needed to go back to where it was before, basically. And I think this is good. Like, if they are going to nerf Moonwells, it should have been Wellspring to begin with, not the base regen. Like, that's just common sense, right? You shouldn't be... Like, unless something's been extremely broken at the start of the game's release, then you could change the baseline. But this is like 20 years into the game, so you shouldn't really be changing the baseline regen like this and just... I think it's been changed before too, but I don't know. It should kind of just be left alone and change other things like the upgrades, like Wellspring. Nerf Wellspring is fine. Wellspring was probably too good. The Fan of Knives is kind of whatever. This could be big. I think we'll have to see how it functions, but it could be big. However, I think it's mostly big at lower levels of play. At top level play, it probably won't matter much, I would think. Nature's Blessing cost. Feels nice as an elf. I'm not sure if it was needed. Or maybe it could just be 175 if they want to test it rather than 150. Move speed. Same as Demolishers, kind of whatever. I don't know if I even want to look over all of these again. I think I've mostly looked over. Okay, so the Undead changes. They want to bring back expansions again. Okay, very small. This is good, I think. I think it's weird that it was normal to begin with. Kind of punished mostly archers. But now it still can punish huntresses, so it's still fine for them. Helps first air. The ghoul changes, I think, could have been different. Maybe attack speed nerf instead of move speed nerf. Frustration, that's fine. Cripple still affects mechanical, but not curse. I think that's probably good. Scroll of Healing changed for Wand of Negation, but Wand of Negation requires Temple of the Damned, and I think this line right here is bad. Should not require Temple of the Damned. The rest is fine, but it should not require Temple. Meat Wagon speed was increased as well. I guess that was the old change. Frost Nova slow duration lowered at higher levels. That's good. Criplord Impale reduced. Probably fine, especially with how Cryptlord's not used as much at top play, but at the same time, Cryptlord is pretty strong at lower levels of play, and I do play Cryptlord myself, so I will take it. Death and Decay reduced, whatever, it's fine, I guess. Web cost reduced, probably a good change, and long overdue. 150, 150 is very expensive, especially with Fiends being the primary anti-air as Undead, besides Nova, I guess. This is fine. Fine, just some wood reduction costs. I don't particularly like that, but it is probably negligible, except against Elf. Why do a lot of these changes seem like they only affect the Elf versus other races matchups? No one's playing worms against the other races. It's just against Elf. This is also good, I think. We're fine at least. Firelord changes are okay, I believe, right? Because this can still be dispelled. Same with this. And this is good. I don't think this was needed. I think Tornado was already fine, but okay, if you want to make it stronger, go right ahead. This is good. Long overdue. This is bad. I don't know why you'd attach food to something that hasn't had food. Especially as a neutral unit. Good. Fine. I think it's bad to implement this change now, but it is probably a good change. It just should have happened a long time ago so that more stuff can be done about it later. This late into the game, I think it should have just stayed as it was, probably. And then Crunch and Creep changes, bug fixes. That's about it. I probably talked more than I wanted to about this. Probably rambled on a bit too much at points too, but yeah. Definitely interesting patch notes. I'm not actually sure how much this all affects the meta and so on. Because a lot of these changes are honestly weird or niche changes that don't actually directly affect the meta. But maybe that's what they want, is they want to do small changes elsewhere that could potentially promote less seen units being used in slightly more scenarios, type of thing, right? Like we might see more tier 2 rifle tower push play, which is not exactly the most uncommon thing, but it is less common these days. You might see more A bombs. We might see more priestess, but it probably is still just going to be in mirror. And what else? Maybe some of the siege units, because wagons were also buffed here, and these were buffed. I don't know. Interesting. I think if they really wanted to make this patch interesting and appeal to more how do I want to put this? I don't want to say appealing to more, but to make people more interested and to see how it functions. I think things like the tier 2 Tauren, even though I think it's probably a bad change, it would have still been interesting to see how it functions and if it can fit that way by having pulverize and stuff slightly nerfed to balance it. And yeah, it would have been a big spin on the game, but I don't know if the game needs big spins like that either. Most of the people that are playing the game are still just going to play the game. The people that are not are probably not looking at these patch notes to come back, so I don't know how good my take was, but yeah, it's mostly just me rambling and saying things are fine. Anyways, hopefully it was somewhat enjoyable to watch and see my side of things or how I view it. Let me know if it matches your views at all, or what you think is different, or what I might have missed. Maybe I missed some certain interactions, like specific damage numbers. I know I did mention some things like this might dodge things like level 2 Breath of Fire, but yeah, we'll see what happens, what changes. There's still technically a final iteration coming, which will be the released patch, I believe. But this is like the final big changes. Now it's just numbers or reverting the change completely, as far as I know. So this might be it and what we see, and see what happens. Hopefully the people that are enjoying Warcraft continue to enjoy Warcraft, and that the people that don't maybe want to try giving another go. We'll see. Thanks for watching.